Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the Staudte family. This is a family that endured loss after loss when 2 family members were murdered and a third was almost murdered but luckily survived. And when I tell you that this is a wild one, I mean it. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Aura. So I have a question for you. Have you ever Googled your name or somebody you love's name and been surprised to see that their private information is just right there for anyone and everyone to see on one of those public listing sites? Because when I tell you, it is far more common for your private information to get leaked out into the internet. And that is because there are these things out there called data brokers. These parasites, data brokers, who take your private information and then sell it to people that you do not want to have it, like spammers and robocallers. And they're making bank off of your private information, and they can even find out where you live, which I am personally not down with that sickness. I value my privacy and I value your privacy, and that's why I want to introduce you to Aura. Now, did you know, I have good news and bad news. Data brokers are required legally to take your name and like your information down if you ask them to. They have to. The thing is, they make it super hard for you to figure out where your information has been spread and who has your information. And that is where Aura comes in. Aura identifies which of those pesky data brokers have your information, and they submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They do all the work so you do not have to. So when I first signed up for Aura, the very first thing I did, because I was just very curious, is I went to the data broker opt-out section, which is a section on their website, which when you sign up, you will see. And I found that over 30 data brokers had my information, and I saw that Aura had already sent out opt-out requests on my behalf. And they check all kinds of other things for you as well. They see if your information's been linked on the dark web, and nobody wants their information leaked on the dark web. They also see if your passwords are strong, which I was curious about because I've used the same password forever. Turns out my password, I chose the right one right from the very beginning. So I've had the same password since 2007, and it's super strong and it's never been breached. And something that I found out more recently is, since me and my husband had a baby, we had to upgrade our car because our car was smashed, and the air conditioner didn't work. And with a baby, that doesn't really work. So I went and, we purchased a car, and we're making payments on it. We didn't purchase it like that. We are not in that tax bracket, but I got emails right away. As soon as my credit got dinged, they were checking my credit. I got an email from Aura letting me know hey, somebody's running your credit. Is this you? Make sure everything's cool. And it didn't stop me from moving forward with getting the car. It wasn't anything like that where now I got to call somebody. It was just hey, just in case this wasn't you, this is what's up. And I was well, thank you for telling me, but that's actually me. And those are just a couple of examples of ways that Aura helps protect you and your family from online threats that you just simply cannot see. Through just the Aura app, which is super easy to set up, you can get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. And you get it all in one place, no need for several apps, and you get it at one affordable price. Now, obviously, it sounds like a great deal to me. And listen, I'm not your mom. I can't tell you what to do. But what I can say is that I don't want people to exploit you and to profit off of your personal information. And you don't have to have that happen because Aura can do all the hard work for you, like keeping you safe online. And I have great news for you in regards to that. Aura is offering members of the Brat Pack the opportunity to see all that they have to offer for free for 2 weeks through the link in my description box. So if all of that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to click the link in my description box, which is aura.com/Bratterstein, and get a 14-day free trial to see if your personal information has been leaked online. And if it has, let Aura help you put a stop to it today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Aura for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. All right, let's go ahead and get into this video. This video is on a case that was recommended to me by a member of the Brat Pack named Susie. Hi, Susie. Thank you, Susie. And it is a case I had never heard of before. But when I tell you, when I started reading about this case and watching interrogation footage, I was stunned, to say the least. And I cannot believe, one, that this happened, well, just I cannot believe this happened. That's my base feeling just across the board, because what the hell? And I can't believe I didn't know about it. For this family to have 2 members of the family die in what at the time seemed like normal circumstances, right? And then for police to realize that, hey, maybe that's not the case at all. And instead, maybe somebody has an agenda to take out nearly this entire family. And then when you find out the who, I was rocked. My shit was rocked. So I went and I read all the things and I saw all the interrogation footage. Hours and hours I soaked into this case, and now I have all of this information in my head. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things and watched all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer when you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Who do you believe was the true mastermind of the Staudte family murders? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the Staudte family murders. Our story today begins in June of 2013 in Springfield, Missouri. It is here that a 24-year-old girl named Sarah Staudte was rushed to the Cox South Hospital in terrible shape. She would go from unconsciousness to screaming in like agony from the amount of pain that she was in. And when they ran tests on her, they found that she had a brain bleed and was in kidney failure, among other things. Basically what was happening is she was going through systematic organ failure and they couldn't figure out why. They're running tests and they're like, what is going on here? How could this seemingly healthy 24-year-old girl just be literally dying in front of us and we have no idea what's causing this? But the answer to the question of what was ailing 24-year-old Sarah Staudte would soon be answered because police show up at the hospital asking questions. And that is because they received an anonymous call from somebody saying like, hey, you should probably look into this because the fact that Sarah is sick right now is sketch as fuck. Because 2 other members of her family suffered from and ended up dying from very serious similar illnesses. Sarah's father, Mark, and her brother, Shawn, both suffered from a mystery illness in the last year or so, but unfortunately they weren't as lucky as Sarah because they both died before receiving medical attention. So, what was making Sarah sick? What made Mark and Shawn sick? Were the cases even related? And who could be targeting this unassuming, conservative, religious household? Well, let's first start talking about who the Staudtes were and go from there. So, the Staudte family, this consisted of 6 people. This was Mark and Diane, they were the parents, and they had 4 children. 1 son named Shawn and 3 daughters, Sarah, Rachel, and Brianna. So Mark Staudte, he was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1961, and he was one of several children born to parents Henry and Dorothy. He graduated from St. John's College in Winfield, Texas, which is actually where he met a young woman he'd go on to marry, and this was Diane Richter. The 2 actually met at a bluegrass festival, and though they were like very big opposites, they really seemed to hit it off. You know how they say there are like 2 different types of personalities, not just introvert and extrovert, but there's like type A and type B. Basically, one is more like fun and outgoing and carefree, and one's a little more reserved and uptight. Well, Mark was the fun type, and Diane was the uptight type. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with being the uptight type, because truth be told, though I give off the vibes of perhaps being the type that is the fun type, I am 100% more of the uptight type. That's just to illustrate that they were different. So Mark was the more extroverted one, as I said, and he was also a little bit older than her. He had grown up an army brat and had moved all over the world, you know, as army brats do. He also had a big love and like a knack for music. He was very talented at songwriting. That was something that he was incredibly passionate about. And Diane, she was more quiet and reserved. She came from a conservative religious family, and she was actually in Kansas attending nursing school when they met. Diane said that she thought Mark was outgoing and very nice, and they really bonded over their shared love of music, and the relationship moved very fast. So when I say very fast, I mean they got pregnant pretty immediately. Like some of the people in Mark's life met Diane for the first time when she was already pregnant, and they did speculate that that could be why they went on to get married so quickly, because that's like something you did more often back in the day. As you got pregnant, he got married. But either way, the two did get pregnant and they did get married shortly thereafter, but they seemed very excited to do so. Like Mark was super excited to start his life with Diane. Diane was super excited to start her life with Mark. So they got married in her family church that she had gone to her whole life. And shortly thereafter, she gave birth to the couple's first child. This was a boy named Shaun. In the beginning of the couple's relationship, they did seem to move around quite a bit because, so Diane had finished nursing school and she was working as a cardiology nurse, and Mark was a stay-at-home dad, which some people find weird, but I personally don't, because like if a mom is a stay-at-home mom and the dad is the one that's working, nobody bats an eye. But when it's the dad who wants to stay at home with the kids and the mom is the one working, people seem to think that's weird, which I don't get. Like whatever works for your family is what works, you know what I mean? But either way, because of that, because Diane was the only one working, she would switch jobs fairly often. She would just kind of look for the same type of job that would pay more. Because why would you stay here doing this job, making this amount of money when you could work over here and make more money for doing the exact same amount of work? Why waste time, say lot word, when few word do trick? Anyways, after moving around quite a bit, they finally settled down. This was in Diane's hometown of Springfield, Missouri, a place that's said to be a good place to raise children, but not a fuss. Whatever that means. Springfield at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, but at that time it was said to be a charming and conservative place filled with kind-hearted, warm people in the, quote, buckle of the Bible Belt. So super conservative, super religious, and the three actually, because, you know, Shaun existed. They moved into a nice little suburb, and their trio went on to be a 6-0 when they had, you know, their 3 daughters. So now there's 6 people in the family. The family was said to be very happy, right? They were described as like the picturesque, perfect family. But of course, like any other family, they did have their stressors. For example, their first baby, Shaun, when he was born, he had some health issues. He suffered from seizures as a young child, and before he had even hit double digits, he was diagnosed with autism. So that just gave Mark and Diane something that they had to navigate, an extra thing for them to handle. Now, none of the 3 girls appeared or were like known to be neurodivergent. Not that it's super important. It is sort of relevant that Shaun, the eldest daughter, Sarah, and the youngest daughter, Brianna, did have some sort of learning difficulty. But besides that, the only real issue the family had to deal with was, of course, like money issues, like so many families deal with, because they only had one breadwinner, and on top of that, there were so many of them, right? They were starting to outgrow their small home because there was too many people in the home, and also, like, everyone had a lot of stuff, and, you know, teenagers, not everyone's incredibly tidy. Anyway, so Diane had been a nurse for years, and she ended up actually changing her career a little bit later in life to work in insurance. At this point, all of her kids were adults. Like when this tragedy took place, all of the kids were adults. So she was thinking that like she was probably going to have less financial responsibility going into like the years because adults are going to move out, etc. And on top of that, this gave her the freedom to have some more free time to devote to music, which is something that she loved. Remember, I told you in the beginning, she would do music. She would do the music at the church. And it wasn't just her. Her middle daughter, Rachel, was also super active doing music at the church. And Diane had actually been an organist at the church for like 3 decades. She was very, very devoted to this. Which again, this is something that Diane and Mark bonded over when they first met, and something they still had in common later in life. Because though Mark, okay, so he didn't have a job, right? He would take an occasional odd job here, like bartending or something like that. But what he was most interested in pursuing, and what he had spent all of the years of his life like pouring himself into, was music. Because as I said, he was very good at music, very good at the music. He was a good songwriter, and so it made sense that he ended up being in a band. He was the front man for a blues band called Messing with Destiny, where he played guitar, he played harmonica, and he sang. So that was the Stouties, a family of 6 just trying to get by when tragedy struck them in the worst possible way. And it all began on April 8th, 2012. Which was the day after Mark Staudte's 61st birthday. Police responded to a call that led them to the Staudte home, which was located at 244 West Page Street, for a report of a deceased person. And this person was Mark Staudte. Apparently, Mark had been sick with what looked like the flu, and it progressively got worse and worse, and people were starting to notice that he was sick. Like, Mark had been practicing with his band a little bit before he died, and they noticed that he just seemed off He seemed out of it. He seemed like he didn't realize they were recording, and he seemed like he didn't understand what they were doing. And they also noticed that he looked a little weird, like his coloring looked off. He looked a little bit yellow. And Diane told police that he was sick, that he was starting to get weak, and he started like eating less than usual and sleeping less than usual. But like, who could know it was going to go this wrong? So police asked Diane what happened, and she tells them what happened. She says that he had been sick and she had been taking care of him, making sure he was okay over the last week or so. And that he started getting worse, and he started seeming like non-responsive to her. Sometimes he would only kind of respond with his eyes, which concerned her. And she said that he also had a seizure, which was not like him. He wasn't the type of person, like some people get seizures when they're sick, especially if they have a seizure disorder. But Mark did not have a seizure disorder, though his son Shaun did. We haven't gotten into that, I don't think, but Shaun had a seizure disorder. But Mark did not. So when he had his seizure, Diane was like, listen, she told the police, like, listen, she told the police that she told Mark, like, listen, I would like to take you to the hospital, please. But she said Mark was the type of guy who was like, you know, a manly man, and don't take me to the hospital. I want to stay home. But then 45 minutes after he had this seizure, she went to check on him, and he wasn't breathing. He was just gone. Now, Mark's loss was super difficult on the family. How could it not be? Because though he was like in his 60s, I still see that as young. Like, I'm not that far from 60, you know what I mean? And it just happened so suddenly. Like, yes, he had been sick, but it wasn't like a long-term illness where you could get used to the idea that the person's not going to be around. And their youngest was so little. Like, she was so devastated to lose her dad. They were super close. And Shaun also had a really hard time with it. He had been documenting his dad's symptoms from his illness on Facebook, and then when his dad died, he was super worried that he would just be gone and that nobody would remember him. So Mark was gone, and his cause of death was attributed to just natural causes because, you know, he was in his 60s, he didn't have a good diet, he didn't work out, so they were like, you know, sometimes people just die. And after he, you know, was gone, they cremated him, and his ashes were spread at the lake. His memorial service was a really sad day. It took place at the church where the Stouties were regulars? Is that the word? I don't know. Where Diane played the organ, and Diane had asked his bandmates to play, you know, at his memorial service, and they played one of his last songs that he ever wrote, and this was called Darkest Hour, which seems like eerily appropriate. So that's already a tragic loss, right? To lose a father, a husband, like I can't even imagine what that was like. But then months later, it got worse when on September 2nd, police responded again to a call that led them to the Staudte home. But this time it was a home located at 1644 West Swan Street because after Mark had passed away, they used the life insurance money. You know, the money that you get when somebody dies, okay, they used that money to buy a bigger house, like a nicer house for Diane and the kids. And now police were driving to this new home where they had gone with hopes to start a new life, right? You would imagine. And they're going there because Diane had found her son, 26-year-old Shaun, dead in his room. This situation with Shaun was very similar to that of his father. You know, he had been sick with what seemed like the flu for the last several weeks, you know, diarrhea, nausea, body aches, headaches, the whole nine. And this time, Diane said that she took Shaun to the doctor because she was having trouble keeping him hydrated, but they hadn't found anything wrong with him. Diane said that she had noticed that he was getting worse, but she didn't take him back to the hospital because, one, she had already taken him there and they said that there was nothing like seriously wrong with him. And two, you know, Shaun had autism, so he didn't really like going out to places in general, but definitely didn't want to go to the hospital again. So he had been at home and he was being taken care of by his mother. She had been checking up on him all the time. She said that she checked on him all throughout the day before and all throughout the night before he died, and he seemed fine. So the next morning, she and her daughters went to church. She checked on him before she left and he was still asleep. But when she came home from church that afternoon, she came home to a terrible sight because Shaun had gotten out of his bed and he was lying on the floor. He was like curled up on the floor with like blood around his mouth, a blanket covering his midsection, and he wasn't breathing and he had no pulse. Now, Shaun had a kidney defect and had had several strokes and a history of seizures, especially when he was sick, even having one just 2 days before his death. So with that, even though his autopsy did find, quote, quite a bit of brain damage, his death was attributed to his prior medical history. It's so sad, dude, because he was so young, 26 years old. That's like, it's just frustratingly young, and there isn't that much out there about him. And that's what really frustrates me, because, I like to tell you all the things, but there just isn't that much out there about him. There hasn't been articles written about him and all that. So I can't tell you much. What I can tell you is that I know he had a job. He worked at a place called the Springfield Workshop, I believe. And it was an organization that helped kids, young adults that had disabilities be able to actually work. And he was said to just be a very friendly person. A very friendly person who, like his father, was cremated. Now, people, as I'm sure you can imagine, were like, holy fucking shit, dude. To lose your father/husband and then to lose your brother/son and so close together, because Shaun literally died 147 days after his dad. That's so much for anyone to deal with. And then it gets worse, because we fast forward 280 days to June, and now the family's eldest daughter, Sarah, is brought to the hospital with the exact same ailment, with seemingly the exact same ailment that killed her father and her brother. I mean, luckily she's brought into the hospital, so hopefully she won't suffer the same fate, but it's not looking good because all of her organs are failing and they have no idea what's going on. But then police show up. 2 days after receiving an anonymous call, police show up at the hospital and they're like, we need to figure out what's going on, because the person who called in seemed to think that something shady was going on. So the police want to talk to Sarah's doctor and they ask, what's going on? And the doctor's like, listen, I don't fucking know, man. I'm sure that's not exactly what they said, but they were basically like, I don't know what's going on. We're running all these tests, and we can't figure out what the origin is of her issue, dude. Why is this young girl dying? I think this girl may have been poisoned. Poisoned. So police hear this and they're like, well, they don't say it out loud, but in their heads they're kind of like, poisoned, huh? That sounds pretty legit based on some information that we already have. Now, you want to guess down below what information the police already had, who the anonymous caller said may be involved in the sudden Staudte family deaths? I'll give you a second. I'll pause, you pause, I'll pause, while you comment down below who you think may have been involved here. Yeah, dude. Diane, the mama. What the hell, right? You had one job. Be a mom. Don't kill your family. I guess that's 2 jobs, but seriously, what the hell? So, turns out the anonymous call that police got actually came from the Redeemer Lutheran Church, the church where Diane had been the organist for decades, and the call came from the pastor. The pastor called police and was like, listen, you may want to look into Diane Staudte for, quote, 2 or 3 homicides, referring to Mark, Shaun, and if Sarah died, Sarah. The pastor said that the whole situation was super weird and that he believed that he was more upset when Mark died than Diane was. And on top of that, the pastor and the church's music director both said that when Shaun died, Diane didn't seem to care. And they just agreed that her demeanor was weird as... Obviously, they didn't say that, but I'm saying it for them. The pastor, said that he and Mark were close, they were friendly with one another, and he didn't know anything that was wrong with Mark that would make it so it would make sense that he would just die. That already seemed weird to him. And then when Shaun got sick and also died, that was incredibly strange. But of course, the final straw was Sarah, because Sarah getting sick after her father and brother had already gotten sick and they had both died would already raise some red flags, obviously. But something that the pastor thought was particularly strange is that he didn't learn Sarah was sick from Diane. She hadn't told her pastor. She told somebody else at the church, and it got to him, and he found it to be very, very strange that this woman who has lost so much and now her daughter is on the verge of dying didn't come to the pastor for prayers and support, which I get, like, I probably wouldn't go to a pastor for, like, I know I wouldn't go to a pastor for prayers and support in my time of need, but a woman like Diane definitely would. So with that, the pastor just couldn't let it go. He's like, maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's something. And if it's nothing, that's great. They'll check it out and it'll be nothing. But I have to at least say something because, you know, see something, say something. So with that, the officer came to the hospital and started asking some questions. And that's when he learned that Sarah had pretty much a 0% chance of living. It wasn't really a question of whether or not she would die. It was a question of when she would die. The officer also learned that while Sarah was in the hospital, whenever Diane would come to the hospital to see her, which wasn't often, and she wouldn't stay very long, she was very, like, odd. She was strangely in an upbeat mood, kind of acting like nothing was going on. She would, like, talk with and joke with the nurses and talk to them about an upcoming trip to Florida she had planned, a little vacay, which she said that, quote, Sarah's situation would not stop her from going on. And the nurses just thought it was weird that her attitude towards the whole situation was very odd, especially considering her daughter was more than likely not going to survive, and that she was like, fuck it, I'm going on vacay anyway. But that version of Diane is very different than the version of Diane that everybody else was seeing, right? All the people in her life were seeing a just distraught mother who had already lost so much and was now begging for thoughts and prayers from anybody who would give them to her, posting online that, like, her daughter Sarah was in the ICU and in critical condition. And everyone was, like, there for her, dude. Like, they were sending her their condolences and just like, oh my God, I can't believe this is literally happening to you again. And I went to her Facebook page and I looked at it, and she had so many people who were there to support her. And knowing what she did and that this was her, it's just so upsetting. Anyways, though, at this point, they don't know for sure that this is Diane. So they go to her home and they ask her if she'd be willing to come down to the station and do, you know, and, like, talk to them about what's going on with Sarah. And she agreed. So on June 20th, she showed up at the police station for what was supposed to be a informational interview to find out what's going on, if there is anything. Because at this point, they can't prove that she's done anything because Mark and Shawn were both cremated, which we are going to talk about one of the cremations a little bit later. But for right now, they've both been cremated. And Sarah, because she was still alive and her body was, like, pumping out all the toxins to try to save her life, they weren't finding anything in her system that they could, like, test against. So they try to question her, right? They start to question her, rather, and they do so gingerly because they don't know if she had anything to do with this. And if she didn't, can you imagine if she had nothing to do with this and she's just a mother who's lost her husband, lost her son, and now her daughter's about to die? You don't want to, like, push too hard on her, but they still need to figure out what's going on. So they ask her, they're like, okay, what happened with Sarah? And she said that about a week before Sarah ended up in the hospital, she started seeming sick. But it didn't seem to be serious. It was just like headaches, muscle aches. She had an upset stomach. She would throw up, but that was pretty much it. She told police that the day that they ended up having to take her to the hospital started out relatively normal. It was Sunday morning, so her, Diane, and Rachel and Brianna, the two other daughters, the younger daughters, went to church. Sarah didn't go with them because she wasn't feeling well, so she was in bed sleeping when they left. When they got home in the afternoon, Sarah was still sleeping, so they let her continue sleeping because, like, a sick person needs to sleep. But after some time went on, they realized, like, okay, she's been sleeping like a long time. We should probably wake her up. And when they went in to do so, she was unresponsive. So that Sunday afternoon, that's when they decided to bring her to the hospital to find out what was going on. She said once she got Sarah to the hospital, they determined that, yes, she was incredibly sick, but they couldn't figure out what was going on. And she said that to look at her daughter, she just looked awful. She said of her daughter, quote, "She was as close to death as you can get. I thought she was gone." She said that after dropping Sarah off at the hospital, one of the first things she did when she got home is she started wondering if maybe her daughter had done this to herself to try to take her own life. She said that she went and looked through her daughter's medication because her daughter was bipolar, and she looked to see, if everything was there. And when she looked, it didn't look like a large amount of pills had been taken. So she kind of ruled the idea that Sarah had tried to OD out. But she did let investigators know that Sarah did have a history of talking about wanting to hurt herself, wanting to, cut her wrists, things like that. But she didn't know if her daughter was the type to actually go through with it. She also told the officer that there were cleaners in her house, but she didn't think any of the cleaners, or she didn't know rather, if any of the cleaners would be like deadly enough to kill somebody or to cause Sarah to be as sick as she was. And this is when the cops kind of like, well, aren't you like a nurse? Isn't this something that you should know because you're like trained medically? And she responds like, yes, I'm a nurse, but I'm a cardiology nurse, so I know hearts, but that's pretty much it. So what she's doing here is trying to give police alternate theories, right? Making them believe that it's possible that Sarah did this to herself, and also playing dumb, downplaying her knowledge as a nurse. Because just because you're a cardiology nurse doesn't mean you only learn about hearts. That's just your specialty. But you still have to go through, like, you still know things as a nurse. Come on. But what Diane doesn't know is that police are already looking into the deaths of Mark and Shaun. They haven't brought this up to her in the interrogation yet, but they're already looking into it, because it turns out that when they first died, this wasn't really done. Their deaths weren't seen as suspicious, so they didn't do their due diligence to see if maybe something suspicious was involved. But what they were able to determine is that they did still have, even though these men had been cremated, they did still have some tissues, I believe from both men, but definitely from Shaun, from when their autopsies were performed. So they're like, oh, we could look into this and we could test it and see if there's anything in their system. Though I don't know how successful that would be, considering, with Sarah, her body purged everything and is purging everything out, so they can't test her. But they're like, hey, we have to at least try. But police tell her during this interrogation that they are looking into Mark and Shaun, because they're realizing that it's very weird that all three of her family members would get sick and then two die and one almost die or be in the process of dying. So they tell her, we're going to look into them. We're going to check their systems. We're going to see what's in their tissues. And they ask her, can you think of anything that might be in their system? Would you be surprised to learn that there was something that they had ingested or, whatever, that killed them? And she was just like, oh yeah, no, I don't know. I have no idea what would be in their system. And then she sort of hugs herself in an attempt to comfort herself. It was also during this interview that the, picture perfect Christian mother facade that she had been portraying to the world started to kind of slip away a little bit. And it's because she started to sort of talk a little bit of shit on Sarah, and then later on Mark and Shaun as well. And it's not to say that the thoughts that she's having and the things that she expresses aren't things that other mothers probably think of from time to time, because I can only imagine how frustrating a teenager / young adult would be. I know I was a super pain in the ass, and my mom was probably get fucked, kid. But these are things that when your daughter is in the hospital about to die, you probably wouldn't be thinking about now. At least that's what I think. Let me know what you think. She said that her daughter Sarah was difficult. She said that Sarah was not getting a job, not trying to look for a job, but she had been in school and her tuition bills were racking up, and that Sarah, who was an adult at this point, didn't seem to have any plans to try to pay for these herself, and that Diane, was just at a point where she was tired of doing everything for her kids. Sarah, a French and history graduate of Missouri State University, who had literally been on the dean's list, wanted to pursue her dream of being a translator, but where she lived, the demand wasn't exactly, very high for a French translator. She also discusses her distaste for her husband. She said that he was always out. He'd be out drinking. He'd smoke weed, and basically just said that they didn't have a good marriage. And she said that her friends had told her, why don't you leave him? Why are you still with him? And she said she couldn't bring herself to leave him because he was bipolar, and she thought he would take his own life. She really seemed to to push her family's mental health issues to the forefront to try to explain what happened to them. This is when the cop sort of pivots, tries to appeal to her, He says, you're a good person. I can tell you're a good person, and good people make mistakes, right? They do things that they never normally do. And that's when she sort of lowers her voice to a whisper and is like, well, I didn't hurt my kids, if that's what you're trying to say. And it's hard, man. It's hard to picture a mom hurting her own kids. I can't understand that. I really, truly cannot understand, a planned murder of your children. It makes no sense in my brain. And she even later said that she adored her kids and that they were her little professors who specialized in different areas in life. She said that Shaun loved to read about Sweden, architecture, and mechanics. She said that Sarah could speak French, and said Brianna was into dinosaurs and cats and was gifted with computers. Then Rachel, she said Rachel was very bright and recently started attending Missouri State in Springfield. She said she was very artistic and was seen as sort of the golden child. She was interested in Japan and played multiple instruments and played in the church band with her mother. She then tells the officer of her kids, and I quote, I didn't hurt my kids, and that's what it feels like you're insinuating I did. I may not be the best mother in the world, but I didn't hurt my kids. When Mark died, it was actually a relief. I just don't tell people that. I don't know what else to say. But the cop doesn't let up. He doesn't stop trying to appeal to her. And he says, listen, I know the mental load that you carry, the extra weight of being the wife and the mother and the runner of the household and the person who brings in the money. But you gotta let me help you. And that's when she finally says something to the officer that is surprising. She says to him, and I quote, "To put it really short and sweet, I knew they were drinking antifreeze." Yeah, dude. Antifreeze poisoning. And from what I have read and everything I know, that is such a nasty way to go. The short of it, because I'm not, like the most educated in this area, is that antifreeze slows down your central nervous system and you die like super slowly. And the problem is that the symptoms of antifreeze poisoning look like the symptoms of a lot of more common things. So it's not often tested for because it's kind of like rare. Dr. Robert Powers, who is a forensic toxicologist, said of this, quote, "If medical examiners get a case that's referred to them that looks like a natural death or natural disease process, there's no reason to go looking for something like ethylene glycol or any 100,000 other potential toxic compounds. So they just don't test for it." So she's telling the cop that her family was drinking antifreeze, right? And she says that she knew they were drinking it, but she only knew they were drinking it because she had seen them drinking it, not because she was the one doing it. This is when the cop goes up to her and is like, "You knew they were drinking antifreeze because like you were giving it to them a little bit, huh? Were you at your wit's end? Did you not have any other choices? Did you feel like you had nothing else you could do?" And that's when she admitted it, dude. She said yes, that she didn't feel like there was anything else that she could do. She literally killed her husband, her own son, and tried to kill her own daughter, dude. And she did it because she said that she looked it up, she Googled it, and she found that it was super easy, super effective. So almost immediately upon realizing she could do it, she started putting it in her husband's Gatorade. Well, that's not entirely true. It is true that once she decided on antifreeze, she almost immediately started poisoning her husband with antifreeze, but she had planned to kill him long before she actually did it. So they were able to tell this by other Google searches that she made. Yes, she made Google searches on how to poison someone with antifreeze, but she also searched other things like Tylenol and prescription medications, and she did this months before his death. She also searched things like fatal essential oils, minerals, and top poisons used in suicide, as well as, quote, "how to kill and get away with it," end quote, "how to kill your husband," end quote, and "how do bipolars kill themselves." Like all people who are bipolar want to kill themselves and would do it the same way. Fuck this lady. But she poisoned him. And once the poison had run its course and she was sure he was dead, she waited an additional 5 minutes before calling the police to make sure he couldn't be saved. And she said that she did this because she truly just hated his guts. That was her quote. Hated his guts. It's a loose quote, but it's the quote. Now, it's hard to say what was going on in their relationship because we were not in it, and things can look different from the outside than what they really are. But from the outside, Mark was said to be a really happy guy, a really fun guy, the life of a party, and he was said to love his family and to love his wife and to spend like all of his free time at home with them, right? Like he played his music, but everyone who knew him said like he loved being home with his family. That was like his priority. But for Diane, he was hard for her to live with. She was the breadwinner. She was the one doing everything. And she was the type of personality who wanted things done a certain way and thought that he would do that for her, and he didn't. But is that enough of a reason to hate him? Maybe. But is that enough of a reason to hate him enough to murder him? Come on. But she really did seem to hate him, man, because one thing that didn't stick out to police, like, okay, it did stick out to police and it didn't at the time that Mark died. Like when they responded to that call and they went to her house and he had died, he was like laying on the floor and they were talking to Diane. And they remembered, but they didn't note that it was important until now. Now they know that she killed him and it's like, oh, that totally makes sense. When they were talking to her, she like walked over his body, and that just seemed like very, very odd to them and stood out. Now, when it came to Shaun, she said that he was just becoming a nuisance to her. She said that he was always getting into her space and getting into her business, and it got to the point that it was interfering with her work. She would tell him to go, to leave her alone whenever he'd come into her room or whatever, but she said that he would not. He was autistic and had trouble interacting with people and like reading the subtleties of people's body language and energy, and probably just wanted his fucking mom, dude. The woman whose one job, main job, most important job is to care for him, but instead she killed him because he was, quote, worse than a pest. So she said she couldn't take it anymore, and after Mark had died, she started putting antifreeze in her son Shaun's Coca-Cola. And she said that within days he had died, but the evidence showed that it actually took weeks of this poor guy suffering before he finally died. And then there was Sarah. And it really feels like as she's going down the list of people she wanted to kill, it starts with like a more severe case of what's bothering her, and then it's like a little less with Shaun. And with Sarah, her reason for wanting to kill Sarah is just that she had student loans that were, needing to be paid. There were bills that needed to be paid, and she wasn't getting a job. That was like it. She said she started giving her daughter Sarah antifreeze about 4 days before she was taken into the hospital. And when asked why she took Sarah to the hospital to try to get her help when she didn't do so with her husband and her son, she just said that she couldn't let her suffer, that she couldn't take it. She said over and over that she couldn't take it anymore. Though we will get into the why on that a little bit later, which differs from this. But this is what she initially said. She really just tried to make it seem like she wasn't that bad. Like, ma'am, how are you going to try to say it's not that bad? You are evil. You murdered 2 members of your family and tried to kill another. But she's like, no, listen, I only gave them a little bit. I would just give them a little bit of antifreeze because I wanted it to be quick and painless and I didn't want them to hurt. But we find out that's not even true. Like, okay, Diane tells police that she was just giving them a couple of teaspoons at a time, and that once they would start to get sick, she would stop giving them as much because she felt bad. But we learn from someone else who was involved, which we will get into, from somebody else that was involved, that wasn't true. They were giving them way more. And once they started to get sick, they would give them even more. It got to the point that they were giving these people glasses of drinks that were half antifreeze and half liquid. It was antifreeze, Coca-Cola, antifreeze, Gatorade. They had literally given them enough antifreeze to be fatal to 30 adults. They would literally pre-mix these drinks, put them in the fridge, and then keep them there so that they could pass them out to the family members. They knew which ones to drink and which ones not to drink because they would screw the caps off of the ones that were already poisoned, and that was sort of their code. And think about this. These drinks are being stored in a house where there's a child, little Brianna. She was 9 or 12. I think she was 9 or 12, I could be wrong. She's a little one, right? And they're keeping these drinks where she could easily go in and get them. But it turns out that that's because they were already planning to kill this child. They were planning to start poisoning Brianna once Sarah had died. But I mean, Diane did say that she regrets it all. Okay, so I don't know if that makes you feel any better. She said specifically, quote, "I'm not a perpetual killer. I'm just stupid. I regret doing it. I really do. I've screwed up everybody. I've screwed up my whole family." So obviously they're going to arrest Diane, but before they arrest her, they ask her a question. They ask her if someone who she knows, somebody who they know of, had any involvement in what happened here or how they felt about what happened here. And I'm being kind of vague because I've alluded to and police believe that Diane had an accomplice while committing these murders, despite the fact that Diane claimed that she worked completely by herself and that it was, quote, her evil. It was somebody very unexpected and somebody who just makes this case so much more fucked up. I honestly can't even believe it. So I'm going to give you a second to guess who you think it is down below. It's somebody that we have already talked about. So I'll pause. I'll wait for you. Go ahead and leave it. If you put her 22-year-old daughter, Rachel, you'd be right. Her daughter, Mark's daughter, Shaun and Sarah's sister, dude. I know, I honestly can't believe it either. So they'd asked Diane if Rachel was involved at all or what she felt about the whole situation. And she said no, that Rachel wasn't involved at all. And they had brought Rachel up casually in conversation earlier in the interview, just kind of asking, how she was, if her and Sarah got along. And Diane said yes, that Rachel was great and Rachel couldn't hurt a fly. But now they're asking about her again and they're being more obvious with their belief that she was involved. So I can only imagine how stressed out Diane was being asked this, because they ask her this and then they pretty much just arrest her and don't let her know what's going to happen next. And what was going to happen next is that Rachel was going to be brought in for questioning because police had already searched the family home by this time. And in doing so, they found Rachel's diary, a purple journal that she kept with all her thoughts, all her feelings, all her confessions, and they had already read it. So they bring Rachel in to question her. And at this point, Rachel knows that her mother has confessed, They had brought her in one other time to question her, but this is when they still believed that she had nothing to do with it, and they were just kind of trying to question her to get her, accounting of how the family was, the family dynamic, to see if it sort of, matched with her mother's story. And spoiler alert, it did not. But once her mother was arrested, she's questioned again, and she seems genuinely shocked. She said that she never had any idea, any suspicion that anything like this happened at all, and when her family members got sick, she didn't think there was anything suspicious about it at all. She said that she was shocked and confused and couldn't believe that somebody she knew could do something like this. She did seem off though, she was clearly trying to act surprised, and she was taken aback that her mother would do something like this. How could you? But at the same time, she seemed sort of detached from the questions that she was being asked, and she didn't take the situation as seriously as it was, even chuckling from time to time. Especially when she was asked what she thought when her sister got sick, right after her father and brother died. When her sister got sick, what she thought, she sort of laughed into her hands and said, quote, "Not another one." But then they bring out photocopies of her journal and they hand her a page for her to read. And they're like, okay, so this is where I'm going to start asking you some more serious questions. And this is where you're going to start being honest with me. Then he reads a portion of her own diary to her. And the passage he read to her said, and I quote, "I wish sometimes that I could avoid the future and keep looking to the past. It's sad when I realize how my father will pass on in the next 2 months and how Shawn, my brother, will move on shortly after. And yet it's really helpful. I'm being warned so that I have more time to prepare and cope. Also, I get to have Dad's car when he's gone. It'll be tough getting used to the changes, but everything will work out." And that passage was dated 10 months before Mark would die from antifreeze poisoning. So the cop reads it to her and then he's just kind of, so what's that all about? Now, at first she tries to make it seem like a misunderstanding, like it wasn't as bad as it was. She said that she'd just been having dreams. She'd been having dreams of terrible things happening to her family and of them dying. And she said that she told her mother about these dreams, and her mother's like, "Oh, that's so funny you're thinking about that, because I have been thinking about murdering them." That's what she said at first. But then it didn't take long of them pushing her before she just completely caved and gave a full confession. She folded like a hand of cards, like a napkin. She folded like an origami murder accomplice bird is what she folded like. She told the cops that both murders were planned between the two of them before they were committed, that they knew they were going to kill Mark, wait a little bit, and then kill Shawn. She said they did a lot of research before doing it. They went online and looked up different poisoning methods and poisonous plants before finally deciding that antifreeze was the way to go, because you could buy certain ones online that were completely tasteless. They literally went online specifically to buy the tasteless ones because some of the ones in store, they add like a bittering agent to it to stop people from drinking it. She said that her mother kept a turkey baster in the kitchen, and what they would do is they would have his drink, Shawn's, they'd have his drink, they'd use a turkey baster, take some out, and then use a turkey baster to put antifreeze in, and then she'd go and she'd take it to her father. Well, she says at first that she only did this once. Only one time did she give anyone a poisonous drink. But then they pointed to her diary and they're like, it actually says here that you did it at least 3 or 4 times. And she's like, okay, fine. I did it 3 or 4 times. And then she admits that her and her mother would just switch on and off doing it every time. She eventually said that they were both doing it every day. They would switch off doing it in the morning and at night, and she said her mother was also doing it in the afternoon. So they were giving these people antifreeze. They were poisoning them with antifreeze like 3 times a day. She also tells police that the way this even came up is that she dreamt about them doing this, so she went to her mother, and that's when they started talking about it and the planning began. And I'm really glad that she included that note, because I'm always wondering when like 2 people kill people together, I'm like, how did this conversation just come up and 2 people just start discussing murdering people, especially in their own family? I always find that weird, and now we know how it came up with them. She said that she was even the one who like came to her mother and she knew about antifreeze poisoning, and that she told her mom it would be easy and it would be, seamless, and that her family members would then just go to heaven. And with that, they could just start over with just the 2 of them. Which is a note that I find to be very important, because the question here is like, who was the mastermind when it came to committing these murders? And I don't know, man, because Rachel was said to be like crazy smart, and when I hear these particular things, I'm like, I don't know. I just get weird vibes when it comes to Rachel. I gotta be honest. And of course, police ask her, like, why? Why did you guys do this? And she said when it came to her father, when he was mad, he was just hard to deal with. And that when it came to Shaun, she had accepted that her mother wanted him dead, though she didn't believe that killing him was necessary. She used a word like necessary. She says that her and her mom would sort of argue. They'd get into fights about whether or not to kill Shaun because she believed that instead of killing him, he could just be put in like an assisted living facility, which is another thing, man, that makes me wonder about Rachel, because later people will say that she was, manipulated by her mother and groomed by her mother to do these things. But if that was true, maybe it is true, but if that was true, would you, as the manipulated person under your mother's thumb, argue with her about this point, or would you just blindly follow her instruction? And when it came to Sarah, what Rachel first said is that she didn't know her mother was going to kill Sarah. She knew about Mark, she knew about Shaun, but Sarah was a surprise to her. But then she was also asked why they killed Sarah, and she said that she believed that the only reason there really was, or at least the only reason that she knew of, was because, Sarah had bills that were stockpiling and she wasn't getting a job and she wasn't contributing and she was just lounging around the house being on her computer, and that was it. But she also added that her mom might have additional reasons for why she did what she did, but that she didn't know what they were. But she did add that she and Sarah fought all the time and that she found Sarah to be annoying. And she also said something just out of nowhere, and that was that middle school Sarah would come into her room at night and touch her, and that Sarah then would pretend like she didn't remember this happening. But it is worth mentioning that this is something that she just mentioned as a one-off this one time and never brought it up again, not in the interrogation and not even at trial. And so I don't know about that, but Diane also said, when it comes to Sarah, I'll just put all the Sarah stuff right here. Diane said that Sarah was a menace and would beat up Rachel and even beat up her. Sarah beat up Rachel and Sarah beat up her own mother, Diane. But I don't know. I don't believe that that's true, personally. I think I just hit the camera. Sorry about that. And another thing that I can't decide if I feel like it's true is that Rachel said that Sarah was involved in the poisoning, that Sarah knew and was involved in killing her father and her brother. Now, when it comes to police, they don't know. They don't know if Sarah was involved because after being poisoned, they can't really question her. Not that they can't question her, but they can't come to a decision on whether or not they think she was involved because of the way her brain is functioning. Because to question her now that she has been poisoned, her brain doesn't function anymore the way it did prior to being poisoned, so they can't come to a conclusion on what they believe here. But I personally find it very hard to believe that anyone in that house would drink something coming from anyone else in that house if they knew what was going on. I would be I'm only gonna buy my own shit and drink it when it is, sealed, signed, sealed, and delivered. I'm not drinking anything you give me because you have a track record for poisoning people, man. Now, you may also be wondering about Brianna, the youngest, who thankfully wasn't poisoned, but they were planning to poison and kill her. Rachel says that she, if it was up to her, she would have rather Brianna just go to another home. Not that they killed her, but they were going to kill her regardless because that's what they were going to do. And when asked why, Rachel said her reasoning for being okay with killing Brianna is that Rachel, didn't have the capability to care for her because she was young and she had a learning disability. And I don't know why she thought she'd be caring for her and not her mother. That seems odd to me, but that was her reasoning. And when asked why she thought her mom wanted Brianna dead, she said that she doesn't know for sure, but she figures it's probably similar to Shaun, that the little girl was just a burden. So anyways, Rachel said a lot, right? And after speaking to Rachel and hearing all that information from her, police want to speak to Diane again and sort of confirm, because they're wondering if Rachel is being honest. Because yes, she admitted to being involved. She admitted to even being the person who brought it up first. But they also got the impression that Rachel might be the type of person to fold to an authority figure like her mother, and that she might just be saying what she thinks police want her to say and not actually be telling the truth. So Diane's brought back in and the cop tells her, listen, I had my suspicions that Rachel was involved and you said she wasn't, but I've talked to Rachel now and she's told me everything. So I know you said she wasn't involved to try to protect her, but we're past that now. So I need you to tell me what happened, exactly what happened, start to end, so we can get this whole story down. She then tells police that all of this started because her husband was a total asshole. These aren't my words. I didn't know the guy. She said that he would go out, get super drunk, come home all foobar and spend their money left and right. She also said that he had a temper and would throw things, and that he was both physically and verbally abusive, mostly to her, but sometimes to the kids as well. But it is worth noting that Diane only ever said that Mark was abusive once she had already admitted to killing him. Prior to that, when she thought she was still getting away with it, she said that he wasn't abusive at all, that the only real issue he had is like he was unfaithful to her. That was their biggest thing. And no one else said that they saw that side of him. No one else said that they saw any, anger issues in him. And his bandmates even said that he didn't really even drink, which, I mean, if you're in a band, that's when you are going to be doing your drinking. So if you're not doing it with him or with them, where are you doing it? And to sort of, illustrate that point that I don't know if I believe he was abusive further, is that Rachel wrote in her diary that her father was the type of man who would rather cut off his own arm than hurt them. Okay. And something that gave a little more insight into perhaps why Diane didn't care for her husband anymore, that might be more true, is that Rachel wrote in her diary that her mother hated the person that Alzheimer's made Mark. So if he had Alzheimer's, oh God, what a terrible disease. I don't know. When Diane was now asked why they did what they did, she said that she just wanted them gone so that they could have some peace and quiet. But I'm sure it didn't hurt that they also had life insurance policies on them. There was $20,000 for Mark, and then $15,000 for Shawn, and $15,000 for Sarah. And she had used the $20,000 from Mark dying to get a nicer house for her and I guess just Rachel, since they were going to kill everybody else. And something about the peace and quiet, by the way, because, oh my God, Rachel wrote something in her diary that is so eerie to me. And I wanted to let you in on this. She said, and I quote, "Once upon a time there were 6. Now there are only 3. Only the quiet ones are left. My mom, my little sister, and me." I find that to be incredibly creepy. I don't know. I know she's a writer and she's a poet and she's smart, but I find that to be incredibly creepy. She said, though, that she just wanted it to be her and her mother because her mother truly got her and she was the only person that did. So they have some, weird bond. And by the way, she wrote this poem, this weird, creepy poem, while her older sister was in the hospital clinging for life. She was still alive when this was written. So she's sitting there while her sister's in the hospital and she's writing this creepy-ass poem. Like an evil little bitch, I'm going to say it. So anyways, back to Diane, because they're questioning her again. They ask her, okay, why did you take Sarah to the hospital? Why did you take Sarah to the hospital to be helped when you didn't do this with Mark or Shawn? And she said it's because Rachel didn't want Sarah to die in the house. Not that they didn't want Sarah to die, period. They just didn't want her to die in the house. They were fine with her dying in the hospital. They even refused treatment that the doctors recommended that could have helped Sarah. And when asked, okay, why didn't you want Sarah to die in the house? Diane said that she and Rachel had experienced some ghost experiences after Shawn died. And Rachel did end up confirming this later, telling the investigators that houses are nasty after somebody dies in them. And apparently she had a really hard time being in the house and sleeping in Shawn's room after he died, after they killed him, because she wrote in her diary, quote, "Yet I feel your gaze lingering over me. I close my eyes and try not to think of the ghosts of copper and bleach on my tongue. I try not to think of shuddery breaths or how easily a soul evaporates, leaving nothing behind but a hollow husk, curled up on the floor, eyes vacant and dull, arms extended. But what were you reaching for?" And Rachel told the cops of this, quote, "I get a lot of nightmares. After Shawn died, I moved into his room and it was awful in there. I kept feeling things in there. I just didn't want that again." Anyways, as I'm sure you can imagine, they were both arrested, and both Rachel and Diane were charged with first-degree murder, among other charges, and I believe they were both held without bond. I know for sure that Diane was. After the arrest, the church that the Staudte family had gone to, where she had been an organist and where the pastor had realized what was going on and alerted the police and everything, they released a statement saying, quote, "The staff and members at Redeemer Lutheran Church were saddened to learn of events involving 2 of our members, Diane and Rachel Staudte, the death of 2 others, Mark and Shawn, and the injury of another, Sarah Staudte. This is beyond our understanding and what we can explain. The congregation and staff have no more information than what was reported in the media. We pray for God's wisdom and guidance to all involved and for the legal system of our community. We grieve together, but trust in God. Our message is always the all-sufficient grace of Jesus Christ in a world darkened by sin. Now, the legal. When it came to the legal, it was pretty simple here. When it came to Rachel, she ended up taking a plea deal. She agreed to testify against her mom, and in exchange, she would plead guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of armed criminal action, and 1 count of first-degree assault. She was ultimately sentenced to serve 2 concurrent sentences on the murder charges and 2 concurrent 20-year sentences on the additional charges, but the 20-year sentences would run consecutive to the life sentences. So what that basically means is that she has life with the possibility of parole after 42.5 years, so she will be eligible for parole in 2055 when she is 64 years old. During her sentencing, Rachel apologized to her sister Sarah, who lived, by the way. I don't even think I mentioned that yet. She lived. It's not great, and I will get into that in a little bit, but she did live. And Rachel apologized to her, saying, quote, "I'm sorry I couldn't find the courage to stand up for what was right, to go for help, to protect you and our siblings. Your suffering could have been prevented, and I hate myself for not being there for you. I want you to know that you are an inspiration to me." She then added, quote, "I was scared, but being scared is no excuse." Now, as we often see, Rachel did file a motion to vacate, set aside, or correct her prison sentence, basically saying that she had a serious fear of men, and her fear of men made it so she didn't get due process because she was afraid and intimidated by her attorneys, who were men, and also the police. She said of this, quote, "When lawyers were appointed, my fear of men was not accommodated, leading to miscommunication, coercion, and mental duress." She added that being in the interview room alone with a male detective was like being, quote, "filleted alive." She also said in her motion that she was not mentally sound while being interviewed by detectives, so she wasn't aware of her rights. She also said that she asked for a psych evaluation but was not given one, was not given access to like all of her police files during discovery or something like that, and that her previous attorneys encouraged her to lie. Now, this was filed in 2018, but I cannot find any update on this, like at all. There's nothing else on the internet that I can find. I know legal things can take a while. 5 years does seem like enough time, but I do not see an update, so I will keep my eye on it, and if we get an update, maybe I'll do like a YouTube short, since YouTube's really pushing those right now to my dismay, to let you guys know what's going on. But let's move on to Diane. So, Diane. She was actually up for the death penalty for the murders of her husband, her son, and the attempted murder of her daughter. And then her other daughter, Rachel, was going to testify against her in a freaking death sentence murder trial. That is intense. But Rachel never ended up actually having to testify against her mother because, like Rachel, Diane took a plea deal. Diane actually took an Alford plea, which is something we've talked about a couple of times, and it's basically her not admitting guilt, because she actually says that she suffers from PTSD and doesn't remember what happened, but that she will acknowledge that police have enough to get a guilty verdict. So that's the plea that she took. And during her hearing, her daughter Sarah made a statement and spoke to her where she said, quote, "I forgive my mom for what she did to me. Not only that she took away my dad and brother, she also took away my livelihood, my independence. I prefer to be a survivor than a victim. I forgive them for what they did, because forgiveness is the right thing to do." While she read this, her mother, who did this to her, refused to look at her, and with her guilty plea, or her Alford plea, entered, she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Now, speaking of Sarah, she did recover. Like, she did not die, but she's like really messed up from the poisoning, dude. She had physical damage and neurological damage, strokes and seizures. She even had to relearn how to walk and talk properly, and had to have like in-person care for, I think, the rest of her life. But she is alive. It's just really sad, dude. She does seem to be a bit better. She seems to have improved a lot throughout the years. She was even able to give an interview for 2020. Some wild stuff came out in this interview, by the way, because Sarah told the interviewer that she actually suspected that her mother was poisoning her or was going to kill her prior to her ending up in the hospital from being poisoned because she read something in her mother's journal. She said that she had found her mother's journal and she had read it, and in it there was a passage about her brother's death and also about herself being killed. Like, she didn't get into specifics, but like cryptic writing about her being killed. And so she went and she confronted her mother, and her mother just told her, like, don't worry, you're not going to die, but don't read my journal again. After recovering from being poisoned enough to understand that, like, she had been poisoned and her mother and sister had done it, she said that she wanted to slap both of them and call them bitches. That was her reaction, which honestly seems like a pretty reasonable response. Sarah has said that the hardest part about all of this is that she misses her family, especially her dad and her brother, but she chooses to see them as forces that protect her and walk with her throughout life. She said that they are, quote, like angels watching over me, and every once in a while I have dreams that they visit me from beyond the grave. She said that since all that has happened to her, she's really leaned into her faith and spends a lot of time at church, which is ironic because one of Diane's complaints against Sarah was that she didn't go to church enough. And she said that she still hopes that somehow she can use her degree and become a French translator, and that she wants to go to Paris or Montreal. She also said that she wants to start some sort of support group for people who have been poisoned. She also says that she is no longer angry at her mother and her sister, but that she does not see them as family. She sees them as killers. Killers with a weird bond, man, because people have tried to, like, dissect this relationship and figure out what's going on here, because Diane and Rachel were clearly very close. Rachel was definitely her favorite child because Rachel was a lot like her. She went to church, she could sing well, she was an artist and a poet, and she really, like, valued Rachel. And Rachel, she and her youngest child were the only members of the family that went to church and liked church. Mark went, but not always. Shaun didn't because he'd be overwhelmed. And Sarah did not go despite them trying to, quote, change her. Diane said that growing up, Rachel was the child that she didn't have any problems with, and that she wasn't difficult, and that she was the most like her. Though later, because in the 2020 episode, Diane actually, did interviews too, she said that she didn't have a favorite child. But I don't know, to me it seems like she definitely did, because for one, she didn't try to or didn't have plans to murder Rachel, so that's pretty huge with Diane. And she also, like, praised her daughter publicly a lot. She didn't really post about Sarah or Shaun on Facebook at all. Even when Shaun died, there weren't that many posts about him. And she posted about Brianna, the littlest, from time to time. But it was really Rachel that she would always post about. Rachel was the one that she would post information about and post photos of and post on her wall. She was like her shining star. So I don't know, man. I don't know what their deal was. If you ask Rachel, she wanted it to just be her and her mom because they had this closeness and her mother just got her. And Diane had her, array of reasons that she gave. But it's worth mentioning that by 2022, during the time that Diane did her interview, Diane has changed her tune and now says that she had nothing to do with it at all. Yeah, in 2022, Diane gave an interview to 2020 where she said that her husband was in with very dangerous people, and that somebody must have came in their house and gave him something. She said that she learned in jail that Mark had been green lighted, which essentially means that he was open to be murdered. In this interview, she says she has no idea how he died, that she just came home and found him in the bed, not breathing, and that was it. But that she wasn't really surprised that he died, and neither were the kids because he had been sick for a while before that. She just says that he got worse and worse, and then that was it. And she says that the only reason that she confessed is because she said what she had to do, what she was told to say. But she won't say who told her that she had to say this. She just says that there's some things out there that people don't know, and that she can't tell, the interviewer more for safety reasons. She says that she can't remember saying the things that she previously said, can't remember saying that she just couldn't get rid of them, couldn't get a handle on, her life. She said that she didn't remember saying that she hated her life, because that's what she said. She said she woke up and realized her life was so bad that she just couldn't stand to be in it anymore. I don't know, man. Diane just seems like a little bit of a bitch to me. I'm sorry, but she does. She was shown a photo of Sarah during this interview, and the first words out of her mouth were like, wow, she gained weight. I'm like, you're a fucking asshole, okay? You dumb old bitch. And then she said that she just hopes that, her daughter's happy. She just said that she hopes that Sarah's happy and content. And then when asked what she would say to Sarah, a daughter who was permanently damaged by the poisoning that you, Diane, gave to her, she said that she would tell her that she's sorry for for what her daughter had went through, but that she's sorry for what everyone goes through. Sorry for what she herself has gone through. And then said that she couldn't rule out the possibility that she herself had also been poisoned. And she also claimed that Shaun had taken his own life and had left a note to that effect. But where is this note? Do we have this elusive note? No, this woman is just dumb and can't accept responsibility for anything that she did. She killed her husband, she killed her son, she tried to kill her daughter, and if she was the one that manipulated Rachel into helping her, she contributed in putting her golden child into jail for the rest of her life. And as for Brianna, the youngest, she lost her entire family and was put into foster care. It's just so crazy to me that somebody could be like this to someone's, right? And nobody knew. Like, if the pastor hadn't called the cops and gave their suspicion, would they have gotten away with it? I kind of think not, because I feel like when 3 people die in one family, that would be too suspicious. Like, some dots might be connected, but like, what was their plan here? They didn't even try to make it seem like they were affected, you know? Like, they didn't act like a normal grieving family would. Like, if you were putting on a show, they didn't. Because I mentioned that Mark had a funeral. He did have like a memorial service. And apparently at this memorial service, Diane was acting completely unfazed. She reportedly acted more like a host, like making sure all of the guests were taken care of, than acting like the grieving widow. There were no tears, no like signs of grief at all. And people just assumed at the time that this was her way of dealing. But then, dude, when it came to Shaun, he didn't even get a funeral. He didn't get an obituary. That's part of why I couldn't find information on Shaun out there, because the person who was there, who was meant to witness him, didn't. She didn't give him a funeral. She didn't give him anything. I guess a couple of people like met at her house. I think the pastor was one of them. But that was it. So some family members didn't even know Shaun was dead until like weeks after. When they found out, they were like, oh my God, this poor woman. But I'm sure they also thought, like, why wouldn't she tell us? Why wouldn't she have a funeral? But then they were probably like, well, she's been through so much. Maybe she just needs a fucking break. And then other people thought like, whoa, that's weird, when a month after Shaun's death, Rachel, his sister, posted a photo online of her just happy and smiling with a quote that said, haven't seen mom this chill in a long time. Like Rachel, man, she said some things. You know, we know she was a poet. We know she was a writer. And she wrote a passage after her father died of his death where she said, quote, his feet were twitching through the door, crack on the floor, and paramedics clumped in the hall, pumped his chest in search of life, only to squelch up what I already knew, that ding dong, the witch is dead. So needless to say, neither of these men got the send-off they deserve. So the Greene County Chief Assistant Prosecutor, his name was Todd Myers, he ended up taking this into his own hands by dedicating a brick at the Victims Memorial Garden in Springfield to Mark and Shaun Staudte. It looks like this is something that is done annually, and at the time that the brick for Mark and Shaun was added, there were also 18 other bricks added for victims of violent crime. But it's not like it's a wall just for murder victims. There's also victims of drunk driving accidents, victims of assault, people who were like longtime community members who were killed, or police officers. And during this ceremony, more than 100 people gathered to witness this. Todd Myers said that he felt compelled to do something here because Diane, their murderer, was the person who was in charge of making their arrangements and their send-off, and that she basically just had them cremated and tried to make them disappear. And Todd said something that I think is the perfect way to end off this video, because it was very touching to me and it just spoke to me a little bit. He said of Mark and Shaun, and I quote, although she tried to erase them from her life, we have chosen not to erase them from our memories. And with that, my friends, is the story of the Staudte family murders, the Staudte family antifreeze poisonings. I hope you found my telling of this case to be informative, and I hope it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Mark, Shaun, Sarah, Brianna, the whole family, minus Diane and Rachel, with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Who do you believe was the mastermind in the Staudte family murders? Do you think it was Diane, or do you think it was Rachel, or do you think they fed off each other? Because there is like a power dynamic with a mother and a daughter, but I just feel weird, and I just want to know what you guys think. Do you think Diane manipulated her daughter? Like, what do you think happened here? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with what case you'd like to see me cover in the future. as this one shows. Anytime you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now I just want to say one last thank you to Aura for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.